Welcome back to the Student Hub Live. Well, I hope you've had some lunch. I hope you've enjoyed that replay with Jill looking at critical thinking. And I hope you've learned some things this morning that you're going to take away with you when you start writing your first assignment. We're now in the second half of our live session today, and we're going to take a look at introductions. And I'm joined by Isabella Henman again, who has done a fantastic session on conclusions, where we were talking about cakes.
We were.
And we were talking about how the conclusion shows the reader how, when you combine all the evidence together, it's allowed you to present what you presented, not just a summary of the conclusion. So now our challenge is to take a look at introductions. But before we do that, I want to check where everyone is at home. HJ, how is everyone?
Well, we're all good. We're talking about the lunch we've just had, weird cream cheese sandwiches, and some people have managed to get the cakes, although I've been banned because apparently we still need them. But yeah, we're just having a good chat about what we're having, and we're coming back on. We're finding all the sessions really helpful. Conclusions, Libby found really useful, and we're looking forward to the introductions as well, especially because a lot of us are coming on to our first assignment. So if there is anything that you're thinking of, or any thoughts or questions you have as well, I know Isabella would be more than happy to answer them and to get you on the right foot with your assignments.
So we've got some things for you to fill in addition to the chat. We've got some widgets or interactive voting tools. We'd like to know where you start writing your essay. Do you start beginning with the introduction, conclusion, or the body of the essay? Again, if you write the conclusion before or after the introduction. And some of the things that you find most challenging about introductions, and I'd like to pull back the results of what you find most challenging about conclusions as well in the start of this session. And then also on the thresholds in terms of the word limits. How much of your essay do you spend on your introduction? 5, 10, 15 or 20? So for those multi-choice questions, you can only choose one option, choose the one that applies to you, and then you can see what everyone else at home said also. And also the word clouds, you need to put 3 things in. So if there's only 1 or 2 things, that's fine. Just put a full stop in and your results will submit also. Okay, so Isabella, we spoke about how conclusions could often be useful to be done after you've written the essay. When you've done the body of the essay, you know what your argument is, you then write the conclusion. Now I've had, and in fact I've done often, putting some of that conclusion into my introduction, which is why it can be a good time to do it, and then get an even more profound conclusion once I've sort of mulled things over a little bit more. So tell us what the nuts and bolts of the introduction need to include and why they can be more useful to do after you know where your essay is going, i.e. you've written your conclusion.
Yeah. So this is the reason why we're doing it afterwards, because it helps. You don't have to, but it does help to have an idea about where your essay's going, which you do from having written it, in order to write an introduction. This is where I've got to get the right words. Get the introduction that's going to clearly introduce and frame the overall essay. Because in the same way as when we were talking about conclusions, it's not just saying I did this, this and this. The introduction isn't I am going to cover this and then I'm going to cover this and then I'm going to cover that. In some ways it is, but it's not done in the same way. It's very much making it clear how you're going to take the overall theme of the essay and signpost your reader on how you're going to do it. So it's taking the topic, making it clear what's important about the topic and how you're going to then tackle that topic in your introduction. So we've got props again here. So this is our idea. So earlier we were talking about we have our basic ingredients and that's what we do. So this is the idea of the basic ingredients, because now we're on the introduction. So it's going to be saying how you're going to combine these. These are the ingredients are what you're covering within the essay. What you're going to do with these, how you are going to do something with them to make them into the essay.
And I assume in what order?
In what order, yes, definitely.
And what you're hoping to deliver at the end?
Yes, because we were talking about this idea of a pithy sentence at the end of the conclusion. You can sort of have quite a nice pithy sentence in your introduction. So you can start off with a framing sentence of your challenge, what you're going to try and do in your essay. So maybe a contentious statement. It doesn't have to be, but it could, for instance, if we're talking about what can you do with eggs, butter, sugar and flour, that's your overall topic. There are all sorts of things that you can do with them. If you can think of a contentious way of starting and then narrowing it down a little bit to say how you're actually going to explain what you're doing with them. So this is an analogy. Hopefully it helps and doesn't just make you hungry again.
I think it does that too. But we talked about this idea of framing our parameter and
Yes.
about how we might say food is amazing, and you could start an introduction with cakes are just the best thing to eat. And again, like you were saying, that pithy sentence could be true,
Yes.
but it could not have any relevance to what you're talking
Absolutely,
about.
yes.
So we talk about this funnel idea. So what I want to know then is how, if we're using this analogy of having ingredients that we're going to structure together to form the cake, where you start and where this broad sentence that we're often told about, this broad, nice opening
Yes. Yeah.
should come in, not being too broad so that it's useless, but how it can actually help shape the debate or the context.
So there's a number of different ways of doing it. So the reason we're asking whether you do your introductions at the beginning or the end, and like with the conclusions where we had some people who say they have a draft to begin with, you could have a draft, you could have a couple of key points that you want to cover in your introduction, which is your pithy thing, what's your topic, and what do you think is going to be the best way of tackling that topic. And then once you've actually done it, then it's like, well, okay, so I'm going to be doing it this way because I know what I've actually covered. It's quite difficult to write a full introduction if you don't know what you're going to cover, because you can actually find that you go off in a different angle once you start getting all the evidence together and start doing something. So we tend to find if it's quite obvious if you've written an introduction before the essay, because it doesn't really relate. So an introduction can, particularly if people are new, we find that they often just restate the question, just jiggle a few words around and restate the question rubric, which is
now
that
this is
kind of
an
thing.
interesting one, because no tutor will ever be more delighted when a student addresses the question they're asked, because we like that.
Yep, absolutely.
But equally, we don't like being told, well, you've asked me to show you how to make a Victoria sponge out of these ingredients, and today I'm going to show you how to make a Victoria sponge out of these ingredients. So repeating that question isn't a very good use of
Not at all.
words, because you can already write your question there.
Yep.
But we talked about this sort of how, so almost like operationalising the thing you're doing and showing the reader how you're doing it. How might you do that then?
Some of those words I love, the how and the operationalising. I often say operation, and what I mean by that, because that's a word that some people don't necessarily understand. It means constructing it. It's the how, but it's the making it clear, the approach you're going to take in order to answer the question that you have. Because yes, you are answering the question of how you combine the ingredients, or I'm going to tell you how to combine the ingredients. How are you going to say? You can't just restate the question, because there's no indication that you've actually thought about how you're going to do it. It's one of those, I'm a bit stuck in a loop here, because it is the how, which is why it's quite challenging to do that to begin with, unless you're really, really confident that you've already worked out exactly how you're going to do it.
Brilliant. So we've got some great ideas from people. Louisa writes the introduction at the end, and Susanna highlights the key words. So I guess she's looking at the process and the content words and things, which are brilliant ways to start with some of this. We spoke about how important, in this example, the creaming of the flour, the butter and the sugar was, right? And how that actually made the difference between which of these products we arrived at the end. Now, the introduction, we're obviously going to tell the reader then how we're going to use these basic ingredients. To what extent do we then want to give the reader an indication about the importance? Like, if you really mess up this creaming of the butter and sugar, you're going to get a really flat Victoria sponge. And if you fold in the flour too vigorously, there's going to be no air in it. So watch out for that. So how do you signpost then to the reader what they should be looking out for without giving the game away?
Yeah, it's a very interesting one, that one, because some people do say, put your conclusion in the introduction, but you're not, because you don't really want to read the whole essay within the introduction, but you want to have maybe a teaser or maybe a very brief summary of what are going to be some of the most important bits that are going to come up, but without making it totally clear why they are, because you want to hook your reader in. Your introduction is supposed to hook somebody in, and they're supposed to go, oh, actually, that sounds really interesting. I want to read about that. I want to know how to combine these together. They're going to tell me. So it's got to be clear that you've picked it out, but maybe in a way that's not saying that the most important thing is you're creaming the butter and the sugar because it introduces air. Well, okay, well, I don't want to read the rest now because I already know the answer. So it's maybe a teaser, unless, of course, again, going back to this thing, you may have some very specific instructions. And at Access and Level 1, we often do give some very clear instructions about what to include. but we don't tell you exactly the words to use. So you've still got scope of making it your own. And the how. How are you making it your own? How are you covering what you're being told to cover?
Yeah, because there'll be different things. So even though ultimately the introduction and the conclusion and the body all feature the same things, they do it in different ways.
They do.
So the introduction needs to say what you're doing, how you're doing it, and possibly have other information like you're going to need an oven or a griddle pan or whatever. Yep. So things you might need. Yeah. You wouldn't mention that in the conclusion, would you?
No, because...
So they're doing different things even though they're sandwiching it.
Yes, they are. And so the introduction is still how you're going to do it, but from how you are going to do it. So it is a forward tense, whereas the conclusion is how you did do it, but it's not the same words. It's not exactly the same thing. So imagine the difference between watching a video about how you're going to do these and watching a video of the final cake.
Yeah.
It's sort of that. They're covering very similar things, but from a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. We're going to go and see how everyone is doing at home. Ruth says that she starts with the introduction, works through the essay and then goes back and revisits the introduction as her ideas have progressed, which I think is a great thing, because sometimes it's useful to have a start. Let's see how everyone does it at home. HJ?
Well, Mark thinks about reading the question out loud, breaking it down, then mind mapping to start the introduction. And Jane always starts with reading the essay question and then going straight to the guidance notes, just see if there's anything specific that's being said that applies as well. And Davin likes to reserve about 10% of his word count for his introduction, and then tries and breaks down the rest of his word count based on some of the things he's talking about. So he plans quite well with what he's doing. But what we're also wondering is an introduction, this might be for higher levels, is an introduction the place to justify while we're not writing about something as well? So if we're not using a particular theory or viewpoint, is that the place to do it?
Very good question. The challenge with that one is that you could spend a lot of time saying about what you're not including, and you don't really want to say, I'm not including all these things. There are some places, and in one of the modules I'm tutoring, the one that we used to tutor together, I can think there's sometimes a scope for covering some of the bits to make it clear that you are aware that they are important, but not within the way that you are going to feed the essay in. So thinking about that, you know that it's important about whisking up the eggs, but in this particular way, that is less important than other things. So I guess it depends. Possibly on a higher level you might, but don't just dedicate your whole introduction to saying, I could talk about this, I could talk about this, I could talk about this, and I'm not going to.
Yeah.
But maybe there might be a little bit that is worth mentioning. Yeah.
But there's, to some extent, I mean, one of the key things about the introduction is this idea of setting parameters. You need to say what you're doing. And I guess that by saying what you're doing, you can also, by default, say what you're excluding, but maybe in a slightly sophisticated way.
Yes.
So maybe if you said, there's loads and loads of sweet and savoury food. Today, I'm really going to be focusing on this particular area because it will demonstrate how blah, blah, and blah, and blah, blah. So you can almost sort of discount and side sweep things by saying, to answer this question, what I'm going to do is really focus on this, this and this. And as long as you've read the guidance, as people are saying it's important to do,
totally.
and you know that you're not reframing the question entirely, then that's fine.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, again, the way that we're talking, because the narrative voice that we're using isn't the way that you actually write the essay. So I know that sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to work out what we mean here. So we're saying we are doing it because it is what you are doing, but when it actually comes to it, you don't say, I am going to discount. So you could say eggs, butter and flour can be combined in to do something, but in this instance, it is less important than the way that they are creamed together to make the Victoria sponge, because that's the theme of the essay. So it's about using your words, but in a way that's appropriate to your target.
Okay. Now, Katrin wants to know, what is the recommended length for an introduction? And we've asked people at home, actually, as well, what percentage of the word count. 85% of people, when I heard last, were saying about 10%. Some people were saying about 15%. And everyone's got very different subjects. As we were saying, some of the STEM subjects are very, very prescriptive. You need a very short introduction. For others, especially more evaluative essays, you might be better off spending a little bit longer. So what are the hard and fast rules then on the approximate?
Yeah, hard and fast and approximate. I always tend to say 10 to 15%. So when I'm using illustrations, I'm basing things on 1,000 word answer, 100 words for the conclusion, words for the introduction, or up to 150. You don't want more than that, because the problem is that then if you're using 150 for both of them, that's 300, so you've only got 700 words to actually present all the evidence. You can do it, but you're going to have to be very, very targeted. Whereas if you go somewhere in the middle, you allow yourself a little bit more. Whereas if you've only got 50 words for introduction and conclusion for a 1,000-word essay, it's quite difficult to make it really clear the how, the explaining and the illustrative bit, the really, really getting to the meat of what's most important.
So I've got some bad examples here.
Okay.
So Davin says that he's writing an essay on making a cake, but he would rather be eating it.
Well, there is that.
So that's a very good example, Davin, of what not to do by saying, actually, I'm not going to answer your question.
Yes.
And we've had some other ones saying that actually the Victoria sponge is all well and good, but they'd rather have a chocolate cake.
I see. I have been incredibly restrained that we haven't got chocolate illustrations here, because anybody who comes to our online ones, we always talk about chocolate.
I've still got the chocolate stars here, which you can have later.
See, I could have put them all nicely over there, couldn't I?
No.
Yeah. Well, again, because our remit was butter, sugar, flour, and eggs. So in actual fact, despite what I wanted to do, which was talk about chocolate cakes, and talk about chocolate cookies, the remit was butter, sugar, flour and eggs.
Yes.
It wasn't.
So this is out of the equation.
It's out of the equation. So this is going back to the example that HJ gave earlier. Love it, really, really, really want to talk about it, not allowed to. And sometimes one of the most challenging things is going, yeah, but that's a great example, I really want to.
Yeah.
You can't. And I've had to do that and I've spent ages doing that, and then I've gone, can't include it. No.
But you mentioned before that there's this thing whereby you need to sort of show the reader then, or reframe the question, actually. That was the point I was trying to make. So you're not wanting to repeat the question, you're wanting to reframe it, but equally you don't want to reframe it to one you prefer to answer. So how do you use the language then, and how do you sort of set out your parameters so that you aren't inadvertently making an entirely different question?
Yeah, again, it's talking about the keywords. We've mentioned this idea before. So if there's process words and keywords, what are they? You can jiggle things around, but it's not a case of, the question is, how can you combine butter, flour, sugar and eggs together? So you don't just say, you can combine sugar, eggs, flour and butter together. You're using exactly the same words in a different order. We noticed that one. I do it myself if I'm not confident, so it's fine. I know that it happens, but it's about, the keywords are butter, sugar, flour and eggs. So you can't really get away from not mentioning them, but it's the other words and the other putting them together bit of it that you've got more scope. There's a limited scope, absolutely. We recognise that one, because there's a limited number of ways that you can talk about the same thing. But try not to just switch a couple of words and just restate the question with different order, because it's not saying how you're doing it, and we keep coming back to this how bit.
So the reader, by the end of reading the introduction, should have an idea about what's going to happen in the essay. They should know broadly how you're going to conclude, because you want to sort of help show them what you're doing and where you're going. But you said before you don't want to spoil the game. So what's enough then? So
it's this idea of a teaser. I think about whether you've seen a decent trailer for a film. Some of them give away so much, but
all the best bits.
And you just go, but that was the funniest joke. No, and you put it in the trailer. But there's others. It's only when you actually watch the film that you realise the significance of something and go, oh. And there was one I watched recently where I went, well, I didn't realise that from the trailer because of the way they carefully edited it together. And they went, oh, no, because that was totally... I'm obviously not going to say what film it was because I don't want to spoil it, but it's sort of that idea. So your teaser, and it's saying, this is important, this is important, this is important. Not saying completely jumble them up so it doesn't make sense, but make it clear that we're gonna let you in a secret. There is a really important way to combine these together to get to the end product.
Brilliant.
But then, and almost leave it at that, because there is, but you've got to read on to find out what it is.
I love that idea of the trailer. HJ, any other questions, and how's everyone doing?
Well, we're talking about adding chocolate as apparently for postgrad research. That's the stage where we do that. So I think Suzanne's right on that point. We'll leave the chocolate out for now. And Naomi's showing up my terrible eating habits. Apparently we should never eat cake between things, always with a meal. So... Yeah, I don't think I can do that though. That's not possible. But we're just talking about the feedback from the tutors as well, because with time the tutors will pick up on everything that we're doing and try and help us develop. And although they may say something that we didn't notice before, it's not a criticism, it's helping us move forward. And a lot of people saying, yeah, but the tutor notes really helped us go forward. Sometimes when we started off, we had really short introductions that didn't give anything at all, but now developing over time, we started to improve our introductions.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that, the forward bit. Often people think about feedback is only looking back. It's not, it's feed forward. The idea is picking up, you did this, which wasn't quite a word, to work forward to help you to improve. That's what, we're not just saying that was wrong or that didn't meet the marks. The marks show you that, but it's saying, why wasn't it? And if you don't know, if you don't understand what your tutor's saying, if they're saying, we didn't cover the information, and just leave it at that, we'll ask them how we didn't cover it, but look and make sure that you're reading all of the comments, because usually it'll be a case of, they might just give you a couple of hints, or they'll say, did you read the question, or there's the idea of I call it the question rubric, but all the guidance notes that somebody was talking about that they always read earlier. Often you'll find there's something in that you haven't covered, and that's why you've missed some things out. So again, look at that to feed forward to help you improve in the future. Because coming back to something we said earlier, we don't expect you to be perfect to begin with, but it's about building the skills and trying to help you move forward.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what people found most challenging about introductions, because we asked this word cloud, and let's see what everybody at home had to say. The length, what to include, being clear, what to reference, focus, not writing too much, the question, key points, details, try not to waffle, when to write it, showing understanding, is it too long, what to start with, repeating the question, first sentence. The first sentence, I think, is really important here. There's a lot of things that we've covered, because we asked this quite a while ago, but there's one thing in particular I'd like to pick up, which is this idea of referencing. So should there be should there be any information or new information in either an introduction or conclusion, and should either of those include any references?
Generally speaking, you wouldn't have references in the introduction and conclusion. Occasionally you might have some in the introduction, because you might want to introduce the key theorists, and if it's on something like that, and there might be some facts, or there might be some key terms that you're defining, because some places you'll be asked to define your key terms within the introduction, but that's not necessarily saying the key term is this and this is my definition, but it's using it in such a way that it's clear what the definition is. So usually speaking, you wouldn't have references, introduction and conclusion. Occasionally you might do, but most of the time you probably wouldn't know.
Okay. And we've got a session on referencing later in the programme today, so we'll be covering those specifics then. So this idea then of the first sentence, this was something that picked up, and where to start, and we've already touched on this, but if you had a choice reading something which had an amazing first sentence but the rest of the introduction wasn't so good, or vice versa, which would you say is more important to worry about?
The majority of the introduction.
Right.
I think the challenge is people want to just have that buzz by single sentence, and they spend a lot of time trying to do that and have that, which means then that they don't do the rest. It's like there's some things where the focus is, some people get really stressed about the word count and spend so much time trying to work to do the word count that they actually forget about the content. The same with referencing. They get so stressed about that they forget that the content is most important. So yes, it's great to have a good opening sentence, but if that's to the detriment of the rest of it, then no.
Because I think it's one of those things with, really that first sentence is saying, what's the concern? What's the problem here? What are we going to be talking about? And how can I briefly introduce you to this idea? Today we're going to be making a Victoria sponge. It could be as simple as that. And I think if you're worried, especially maybe at level 1 or if you're doing an access module, you don't need to be profound.
No, not at all.
That's for postgraduate, for your chocolate level essays. But it's just really sort of having something that says, this is what we're covering and this is why it matters.
Yes, why it matters, how it matters. The why it matters is important, and then how you're going to cover it is important, and then you'll cover the how it was covered and is important in the conclusion,
Brilliant. So we might say cakes are really important for social reasons and because they're delicious. Today I'm going to show you how to do this, this and this, to combine them together to do this, and you're going to need this along the way.
Yeah. Absolutely, that's fine,
It'll be delicious.
It will.
And then that's the trailer.
Yes. No, yes. all sorts of interesting ways of making a trailer out of that.
We probably shouldn't.
No,
How's everyone at home, HJ?
Well, Davin's got a great way to sort of sum up what we've been saying, and he says cream on the cake is nice, but it would not be so nice without the cake. I think that's a fantastic way to sum up what we've been talking about. But yeah, we're just talking about our conclusions. We are concluding that we like chocolate cake. That's something for definite. And we're also talking about definitely the thing to do before starting the next assignment is look at the feedback. As you said, it is so important, and the guidance notes for everything that we're looking at as well. So although it seems a bit new and there's so much to look at and read if you're just starting off, there are some things that are absolutely essential. And a lot of people who've experienced with their writing their essay say guidance is the main thing you want to keep an eye for.
Brilliant. Now, we asked in the last session about conclusions, and I just want to make sure that we've covered both of these aspects. So we asked everybody earlier what they found difficult about conclusions, and let's see how that compares and if there's anything else we need to cover. So these were the things about conclusions, and again, very similar to some of the things we've already talked about. Introduction, word length is one thing, repeating, understanding, that last sentence, and rounding off the conclusion, not repeating things, whether to add something new, which you shouldn't be doing, in a conclusion, so no new evidence in the conclusion, and how to finish and when to stop. So what would be your final take-home point then about some of those things with conclusions that people have talked about, and the most important things to bear in mind with those introductions and conclusions?
So the introduction is about making it clear what you're covering and how you are going to do that. The conclusion is summarising what you've done and the overall theme, which were the bits that made it go the way it did.
Yeah.
Not phrased in a very nice way.
Wait, no, that's great. Yeah. And when should people worry if they're not writing these amazingly profound introductions and conclusions? After how many years?
Postgraduate level.
So it's a gradual process. So luckily, you'll get to write a lot of assignments and practice.
Absolutely.
But the key thing then is to make it really, really clear. Yeah. So while we appreciate there can be a lot of anxiety around these profound statements, where to start, how to do it, if you pay attention to some of those key things and really focus on framing, showing the reader how you're going to be approaching the essay question, and then showing them how all the evidence meets that question at the end, that will be absolutely fine. If you do all of that in your own words, all the better, and it doesn't have to be this profound thing that I think we build it up to be sometimes.
Yeah, it's true. Sometimes we get so stressed about certain parts of it, but it would be great to do that. Work towards it. And that's what the thing is. You're getting the key. You're getting some of the ideas, and you're getting some of the skills. Work towards it, and then hopefully, by the time you're getting to postgraduate, you'll be doing it. By the time you're getting to level 2 and 3, hopefully you're getting much more confident. It takes time. It takes work to learn these things.
Well, Davin says the conclusion of this event will result in the disappearance of this cake. And I think he's absolutely right. So thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you for watching. We're going to show you a short video on reading difficult text, and then I will be back with my next guest, Georgina Blakely, and we'll be talking about something that will really appeal to you if you're doing level 1 or an access module, which is the whole describe component of an essay. So we'll be back in 5 minutes after this video.